So you later became very close to somebody you wrote a biography about named George Herbert Walker Bush. Now, how did you get to be close to him? I don't really know. And he gave you access to his diaries, and you wrote a book, and you became so close to him that he asked you to give his eulogy.
Yeah, not gonna do it. No, just kidding. Can I tell you a quick story about two of my topics? So this tells you everything about George Herbert Walker Bush. So in 2017, the incumbent president, then incumbent president, President Trump, was coming down to Nashville, where I live, to the Hermitage, to Jackson's house, to sort of embrace Andrew Jackson. And I wrote an open letter to the president saying, if you're going to embrace Andrew Jackson, don't just embrace the crazy parts, right? Jackson was a unionist. He believed in the rule of law. So just, don't just go for the wilder parts of it. And it was the entire front page of the local newspaper. And it had no effect whatever, of course, on the president. The next day, I'm walking into lunch and my phone rings, and it was George H.W. Bush. And he'd been spending a lot of that winter in the hospital down in Houston. So his staff had given him this letter to read. And he called up and I said, Mr. President, how are you? He said, how you doing? And I said, I'm fine. Dana Carvey once said the key to doing the old man's voice was Mr. Rogers trying to be John Wayne. It's a perfect description. He said, how you doing? I said, I'm fine, sir. How are you? He said, I'm fine. He said, I read your letter to Jackson, and I thought, oh, shit, the old boy's losing it, right? He thinks I'm writing letters to dead people. And so I said, Mr. President, thank you for calling, but actually that was a letter to President Trump about Jackson. And without missing a beat, the old man said, yeah, but Jackson will pay more attention. So that's it. What I say about President Bush is I first met him, you were there when I first met him, in Kennebunkport in 1998, Labor Day 1998. I had been an undergraduate in the Bush years, and so I was a little fuzzy. My roommate was a guy from Lynchburg, Tennessee, named Jack Daniels, right? I was not following things particularly closely. Gulf War might have had something to do with Destin, but so I had this kind of Saturday Night Live picture of him in my head, the out-of-touch guy, right? The supermarket scanner and all that stuff. Within 5 minutes of talking to him, I thought, oh, there is this quiet, persistent, enveloping, reassuring charisma about this man, that if you have to find one person to hand the nuclear codes to, this is a perfectly plausible set of hands. And part of what I wanted to do was try to explore how was there such a gap between the Bush of 92, who only got 39% of the vote, and this man that I saw. And so over the next X number of years, he did offer me the presidential diary, which is a riveting document. He talked into a tape recorder. One of the things about President Bush is he didn't think anybody ever wanted to hear any president complain about being president. He's like, you're president, shut up, So he complained to the one person he knew would listen, himself. He just did a kind of self-therapy. And so we had these tapes several times a week, all 4 years. Mrs. Bush let me read her diary, which had been a diary since 1948. The only condition on it was I had to, because it had some family stuff, I had to clear with her anything I quoted from her diary. And I took her maybe 60 pages of proposed excerpts. And I'll never forget, we were sitting there and she was reading it and turning the pages. And she said at one point, I was an opinionated 32-year-old. Yes, ma'am. Some things don't change. There were no conditions. I could write it as I saw it. There were parts of it they didn't like. So what I sometimes think of is, the way to put it is, I didn't fall in love with George Bush. but I came to love him because he was a flawed, ambitious, George Bush would cut your throat for a vote, but he'd be the first guy to call 911, right? I mean, that was the tension. And I saw in him the best that I think we, in many ways, can hope for in a fallen world.